Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got quite a stack of sources here, articles, notes, all focusing on South Asia, a region that's, well, incredibly important, endlessly fascinating.
And often caught in this real tension, between conflict and cooperation.
Exactly. It's constantly in the headlines, often for those tensions, nuclear powers, border issues, ethnic strife.
But the sources also make it really clear. There's this deep understanding among the people there that, look, cooperation is just essential for progress.
Absolutely. So our mission today, looking at all this material you've shared, is to really take that deep dive. Understand the dynamics of contemporary South Asia, specifically through that lens, the push and pull between, rivalry and partnership.
Yeah, we'll try to unpack what defines the region, look at the complex domestic political paths in some key countries,
Right.
and then see how those internal situations influence the relationships between them. The conflicts, but also the surprisingly persistent efforts to work together.
Okay, let's start with the sources do, with this really striking image.
Yeah.
An India-Pakistan cricket match.
Ah, yeah.
Think about that atmosphere, the intense rivalry, sure, the history, but also those moments of genuine sportsmanship. You see fans sharing space, that hope for connection. It's such a vivid symbol for the region, isn't it?
It really is. That coexistence of deep suspicion and then surprising moments of trust, it captures that core tension perfectly.
So, defining the region first. The sources typically list Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka.
That's the core group, yeah. And geography plays a massive role here. You've got the Himalayas up north, the oceans all around.
Kind of naturally insulating the main subcontinent.
Exactly. And that's contributed to the distinct linguistic, social, cultural identities that we see.
Though the sources do mention the fuzzier edges, right? Afghanistan, Myanmar sometimes get pulled into the conversation about the wider area.
They do, but the sources are pretty clear. China is different. It's a critical external player, a huge influence, no doubt.
But not geographically part of South Asia itself.
Correct. And even within those 7 core countries, the diversity is just immense. One geopolitical space, but an incredible mosaic of cultures.
What really jumped out at me from the sources, though, is his shared democratic aspiration. It seems to cut across the region despite such different actual experiences with democracy since independence.
That's a crucial point, you're right. The variation is huge. India and Sri Lanka, for instance, the sources highlight them for maintaining democratic systems pretty consistently since 47 and 48, respectively.
Despite facing major internal challenges, India's persistence as a democracy throughout its history is called genuinely remarkable in this material.
Yeah, and contrast that with, say, Pakistan and Bangladesh. They've had these cycles, haven't they? Civilian rule, then military rule, back again.
Bangladesh saw that return to democracy post-Cold War, but Pakistan, repeated military takeovers, like in 99, before returning to civilian governments, sort of, since 2008.
And Nepal's journey is maybe the most dramatic described here. From a kingdom where the monarch held sway, to a constitutional monarchy, and then, boom, a democratic republic in 2008.
Yeah.
The monarchy completely abolished.
The smaller countries mentioned also went through big changes. Bhutan becoming a constitutional monarchy, multi-party democracy in 2008. The Maldives moving from a sultanate to a republic way back in 68, and then getting a multi-party system in 2005.
Right, with the Maldivian Democratic Party becoming quite dominant there.
Okay, but here's where the sources offer that really powerful insight you mentioned, despite this mixed institutional record.
Yeah.
The survey findings cited show something else. Widespread, deep support for democracy among ordinary citizens.
Yeah.
Across the 5 big countries, at least.
Yes. The sources show people, rich, poor, different religions, they view democracy positively. They like representative institutions, they prefer democracy over other systems, and they think it is suitable for their country.
And why is that so significant? Well, the sources argue it challenges those older ideas, that democracy only really works in prosperous Western places.
Exactly. The South Asian experience, especially this popular aspiration, it kind of expands our global picture of where and how democracy can be desired and pursued.
Okay, let's dive a bit deeper then into some of those country journeys. Understand the specific paths using the sources. Pakistan's history, for example, punctuated by military coups.
Yeah, Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, Zia Haq, Pervez Musharraf, all seizing power, interrupting civilian governments like the Bhuttos or Nawaz Sharif's.
And the sources point to a few factors fueling this instability.
Yeah.
The The social dominance of the military itself,
Right.
plus the influence of the clergy, the big landowning families,
Yeah.
it often created conditions for overthrowing elected governments.
And what's fascinating, according to the sources, is how that ongoing tension with India has actually sort of strengthened the pro-military groups.
Oh, so?
Well, they've often argued that democracy is too messy, too weak to guarantee national security against India. It becomes a justification for military intervention.
But the sources balance this, don't they? They note the strong pro-democracy feeling among the people, a courageous press, active human rights movements.
Absolutely. It's not a simple picture. And the sources also bring in the international angle, which is key.
Meaning?
Well, the inconsistent support for Pakistani democracy from outside. Sometimes powers like the U.S., for their own strategic reasons, maybe worries about terrorism or the nuclear weapons.
Right.
They've seemed to prefer, or at least tolerate, military rule. Saw it as more stable, maybe, for their interests.
Interesting. Okay. Moving to Bangladesh. Its whole origin story is tied up in a fight for democratic rights, wasn't it? Coming out of the partition of Bengal and Assam.
Yeah, deep resentment towards West Pakistani domination, especially trying to impose Urdu. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, his Awami League, they led that movement for Bengali autonomy.
And the key moment, the sources say, was the 1970 election. Awami League wins a majority across all of Pakistan.
Huge win. But the West Pakistan-dominated government refused to let the assembly meet. That led to Sheikh Mujib's arrest, a brutal military crackdown, massive casualties, and a huge wave of refugees pouring into India.
And India's support, eventually the 1971 war, led to Bangladesh's creation. Post-independence, they aimed for secularism, democracy, socialism in their constitution.
But things shifted fast. The sources note a move to a one-party presidential system under Sheikh Mujib in 1975. Then his assassination.
Followed by military rule again, Ziaur Rahman, H.M. Ershad.
Right. And the return to multi-party democracy in 1991, sources stress, wasn't just handed over. It came from massive public protests. Students were really key.
They mentioned that mural of Noor Hussain, the activist killed in 1987.
Yeah, a powerful symbol of that popular demand.
Nepal's transition is another really interesting case study in the sources. From a kingdom where the monarch resisted democratic reforms.
Despite popular pressure, yeah.
Then a big pro-democracy movement in 1990 forces the king to accept a constitutional monarchy, a multi-party system. But that period was shaky. Unstable governments, the Maoist insurgency growing.
It created this really complex three-way conflict, monarchists, Democrats, Maoists, and it escalated in 2002 when the king just dismissed parliament.
Basically ending the democratic experiment.
For a time. But then came that massive nonviolent movement in April 2006, the Jana Andolan II. Political parties, Maoist civil society groups all together.
The sources mention people like Durga Thapa, who was involved back in 1990 and 2006.
Right, symbolizing that long struggle. These huge protests forced the king to restore parliament. It really paved the way for a massive change.
Becoming a democratic republic in 2008, a unique path, decided by a constituent assembly that also wrote the new constitution, finished in 2015.
And the sources touch on the debates during that process. The Maoists' demands for social change, suspicion about India's influence, especially from the Maoist side.
Okay, finally, Sri Lanka. The sources make a distinction here. Consistent democracy since 48, relatively speaking.
Right, no cycles of military rule or monarchical resistance like elsewhere.
But it's massive challenge, that brutal, long-running ethnic conflict.
Yeah, the core fight between the majority Sinhala community and the Tamil minority, many with roots in India. The sources suggest that Sinhala nationalism led to policies that Tamils saw as discriminatory.
Neglecting their concern.
Exactly, which fueled militant Tamil nationalism.
Leading to the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Their armed struggle for Tamil Eelam, a separate state, starting really in 1983. They controlled significant territory for a while.
And the sources detail India's complicated involvement. Pressure from Tamil Nadu inside India, leading to negotiation attempts, the 1987 Accord, and then sending the Indian Peacekeeping Force, the IPKF.
Which, crucially, the sources note, ended up fighting the LTTE and became really unpopular with Sri Lankans, seen as interference.
Deeply unpopular. The IPKF pulled out in 1990, mission not achieved. The conflict dragged on, with others like Norway trying to mediate. It finally ended militarily in 2009 with the LTTE's defeat.
But here's that paradox the sources highlight.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Despite decades of civil war, Sri Lanka managed significant economic growth, high human development levels.
First in the region to liberalize its economy, controlled population growth early on, highest per capita GDP for years, even during the war.
It maintained a democratic system throughout. That resilience, that capacity for progress alongside conflict. It's a really key point for the material.
Definitely.
Okay, let's shift focus now from the internal stuff to the relationships between these countries. The sources are clear. The Cold War ending didn't just magically fix regional conflicts.
Not at all. And, well, if you look at the map and the sources, India's size and central position mean it's involved in pretty much all the major interstate conflicts.
The biggest one, the longest running, according to the sources, India-Pakistan. Kashmir is right at the heart of it.
Wars in 47, 48, 65 didn't settle it, led to the division along the line of control. Even India's win in the 71 war didn't resolve Kashmir.
And beyond territory, there are strategic issues. Siachen Glacier, the arms race.
And then nuclear weapons. Both got them in the 90s, tested in 98. The sources argue this actually, maybe ironically, reduced the chance of a full-scale conventional war. Too risky.
But the underlying suspicion is intense, as detailed in the sources. India blames Pakistan for backing militants in Kashmir, historically Khalistani groups too. Alleges ISI involvement in anti-India activities via other countries.
And Pakistan flips that, blaming Indian agencies for trouble in Sindh and Balochistan. It's deep-seated mistrust.
There are other issues too, like water sharing. Though the sources note the Indus Waters Treaty from 1960 is a rare success story. Mediated by the World Bank, it survived multiple wars.
Amazing, really. Though there are still minor disagreements on interpretation, and there's that border dispute in Sur Creek, Rann of Kutch seems minor, but it's about sea resources. Negotiations ongoing.
Okay, what about India and its other neighbors? The sources describe a general dynamic, right? India's size makes smaller neighbors nervous about dominance.
While India worries about instability on its borders or outside powers using its neighbors.
Right. With Bangladesh, the sources list specific friction points. Sharing river waters, Ganga, Brahmaputra.
Bangladesh denying large-scale illegal immigration into India, alleged support for anti-Indian groups, refusing transit for troops or gas exports.
And Bangladesh feels India acts like a regional bully on water, stirs trouble in the Chittagong Hill tracts, uses unfair trade practices, though that border dispute was resolved in 2015.
Yes, the enclave exchange, a positive step. And despite the friction, the sources do point to growing cooperation. Economic ties have improved a lot over the last 20 years.
Bangladesh is part of India's Act East policy, cooperation on disaster management environment. So it's mixed.
Very mixed. Now, India-Nepal, that's described as a special relationship, visa-free travel, and work.
But still, differences persist. Trade disputes, India's unease about Nepal's ties with China, concerns about anti-Indian elements.
Especially linking Nepalese Maoists to Naxalite groups in India. That's a security worry for Delhi.
And Nepal often feels India interferes internally, wants its water resources, restricts its sea access because it's landlocked.
Yet, the core ties are pretty stable. Lots of trade, science cooperation, joint resource management, electricity projects. The sources suggest Nepal's democracy consolidating could improve things further.
India-Sri Lanka. Difficulties mostly stemmed from that ethnic conflict. India is struggling to stay neutral on Tamil issues. Since the IPKF experience, India seems to prefer keeping some distance.
But cooperation exists there, too. A free trade agreement helped. India aided post-tsunami reconstruction.
And then India-Bhutan is called a very special relationship, pretty much conflict-free.
Bhutan's help dealing with insurgents from northeast India was very important for India, and India is heavily involved in Bhutan's hydro project's biggest aid source.
India-Maldives also sounds positive, warm, cordial ties. India helping stop that coup attempt in '88 was a big moment.
Yeah, built a lot of trust. India contributes to their economy, tourism, fisheries.
It's important to remember, though, as the sources point out, not every conflict involves India directly.
True. There have been tensions between Nepal and Bhutan over ethnic Nepalese migration, Bangladesh and Myanmar over the Rohingya crisis, even potential future issues between Bangladesh and Nepal over Himalayan river waters.
But geographically, yeah, India is usually involved in the major ones.
Okay, so we've painted this picture of conflicts, disagreements, but the sources also really stress that recognition within South Asia that cooperation is absolutely necessary.
For shared prosperity, yeah. SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, launched '85. That was the big multilateral push.
But its success has been limited, the sources say, hobbled by political differences, especially India-Pakistan.
Then there's SAFTA, the South Asian Free Trade Agreement, signed 2004, started 2006. The goal, lower tariffs, create a free trade zone.
Simple goal, but complex reactions. The sources show different perspectives. Some smaller neighbors worry it's just India dominating their markets, increasing influence.
While India emphasizes benefits for everyone, arguing more trade builds political cooperation.
And some voices inside India even question its value given existing bilateral deals. Does SAFTA add much?
Interesting debate. But even between India and Pakistan, despite the core conflict, the sources highlight specific peace efforts that, well, persist.
Yeah, things like confidence-building measure to reduce war risk, important work by activists and cultural figures trying to build bridges,
Leader summits trying to find solutions, however limited, opening bus roads.
increased trade, especially between the two Punjabs, easier visas for people-to-people contact. Small steps, but they happen.
Now, no region is an island. The sources emphasize outside powers influencing South Asia. China and the U.S. are the main ones discussed.
Right. Sino-Indian economic ties have improved a lot since the 90s. Development, globalization driving that,
But China's strategic partnership with Pakistan remains a major irritant for India.
exactly. And U.S. involvement, rapidly increased post-Cold War. Good relations with both India and Pakistan often acts as a moderator between them.
Economic reforms in the region, large diasporas in the U.S., big markets,
Yeah.
gives the U.S. a real stake.
So, pulling all this together, the histories, the internal politics, the conflicts, the cooperation efforts, the outside players, what's the future look like? More conflict, or can it become a cooperative bloc?
The concluding thought from the sources really sticks with you. Ultimately, it depends far more on the people and governments within South Asia.
Than on any outside power. It's their choices, really.
It's this constant balancing act, isn't it? The rivalry is undeniable, deep-rooted.
But that thread of goodwill, that desire for something better, it's also there in the sources.
Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Considering everything we've discussed, the challenges, but also that clear popular desire for democracy, what specific internal changes, what shifts in political culture within these countries might be the most critical things needed to finally unlock genuine, lasting regional cooperation? What needs to happen inside first? Something to mull over.
A complex, but vital question indeed.
Thanks so much for bringing us these sources for this deep dive. It's been fascinating.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.